And welcome back to the lunchroom. We do hope you're having a good one indeed, wherever you are. And of course, we're heading across to the constituency of Dennery South on the east coast of St. Lucia to touch base with an individual who has spent the better part of his professional career in the forest. And he is Mr. Alfred Prospere, and he is in fact the hopeful candidate for the St. Lucia Labour Party for the constituency of Dennery South. Welcome to the lunchroom, Mr. Prospere.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you very much.
Now, how are you doing? I assume, of course, you are looking forward to an upcoming general election. We're seeing we may only be a couple months away, could possibly up until October. We're not sure. How are you feeling? What's the scene like for you as a first-time candidate coming into the politics of St. Lucia?
Yes, colleagues, I just want to before I answer your question, let me thank you for the invitation to participate on this program. I want to just say a special good afternoon to all constituents of Dennery South. I want to say special good afternoon to my family. And I also want to take time to extend special greetings to our comrade Jeremiah Nobot, who is currently in Martinique, and we all know what happened to him, and I want to take the opportunity to wish him the best. I know he's doing very well, and I'm certainly sure he's listening, and if he's listening, I want to say all the best to him, and I wish him a very, very speedy recovery. I also want to take time to extend a very good afternoon to my daughter in the U.S., Crystal, how are you doing? And also Vicky, who's a member of my family. I want to say a special good afternoon to them. Well, to answer your question, colleagues, I'm very excited, I'm very happy, and I can't wait for the next general election because it is very important for us, not just as a constituency, but as a country. And ensuring that all preparations are in place, our people are working and getting ready. So as soon as the Prime Minister calls the election, Dennery South will be extra ready to go to the polls and to get Alfred Prospere Starbatch as the new MP for Dennery South under St. Lucia Labour Party government.
Right. Now, Mr. Prospere, your background, very interesting enough. You were the former chief forestry officer. You've worked a very long time within the forestry department of St. Lucia. I'm not sure if I'm correct to say that I think this may very well be the first time that we're seeing a forester enter the political realm. Of course, we have had in the past in St. Lucia a lot of notable persons in the Department of Forestry who were very much active in an advocacy sense, such as Mr. Gabriel Coco Charles, who, of course, did so very much in terms of the awareness and advocacy and push towards forest conservation here in St. Lucia. Tell us a little bit about first, before even as to why you got into politics, what made you interested in getting involved in forestry?
That's a very good question, colleagues. And forestry, to me, it has always been an area of interest to me. From the time I was a little boy, I used to go to the garden with my mom, and I used to really admire the persons from Dennery who were involved in forestry, because I felt at the time that it seemed to be kind of a dirty job, but I always had a love and passion for the forest. So that really stimulated my interest in wanting to become a forester. And since I became a forester in October of 1986, I have enjoyed the 34 years that I spent in forestry. It is a very interesting, very challenging sometimes in terms of, maneuvering the forest, but at the same time, you are feeling really excited about performing a task that results in tremendous benefits to our country. And when I speak of the country, I mean in terms of water supply,
right,
biodiversity conservation. Our forest plays that vital role in conserving our soils, and we hear people speak of the role of forest in terms of heavy rains and natural disasters. So I felt very excited being a part of the forestry department, and I was very happy to contribute immensely to the management and protection of our forest resources in St. Lucia.
And certainly coming out of Dennery, well, of course, as you mentioned, the association, very early association of forests, were with water supply. And, there was the Castries Waterworks Reserve as well as the Dennery Waterworks Reserve up at Erad. And so certainly it is a very important aspect with respect to the issues there. But ironically enough, Dennery still seemed to have been an area that suffered a lot in terms of water supply. More so perhaps the Mabuya Valley, where you've had a perennial issue of getting water there. And only quite recently that Dennery water supply project finally coming on stream.
Yes, and that is very good because ironically the Mabuya Valley problems in terms of scarcity of water had nothing much to do with collection.
Right.
Although it is the second largest watershed on the island, but the problem was distribution. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy that the St. Lucia Labour Party was able to get funding to get a regular supply of water to the residents of Mabuya Valley. Now, just to give you a little background in terms of our situation in St. Lucia with regards to our watersheds, we have 37 watersheds, and we have five of the largest watersheds include the Fonda watershed, which covers most, if not all, of the Dennery North constituency. And amazingly, this entire watershed, which comprised about 10,000 plus acres of land, only has a small percentage of 10% forest reserve. Mm. So that tells you most of the lands within the watershed, that watershed is privately owned. So when you have situations like this, while it's a very large watershed, but the area reserved as forest is so small,
right,
that it really does not meet the water needs in terms of a regular supply of water, particularly in the dry season. And that is why it is important that a government views this as very critical. And I'm saying this on the basis that we have a number of hotels that have been constructed very often in St. Lucia, but the demand for water is not being considered by those governments who are actually approving those hotels. Mm-hmm. So given our small percentage of forest, which is approximately 15% of the total island, which represents about 25,000 acres, it is very small as compared to places like Trinidad with 46% and Guyana with almost 80%. Right. So it's very important that we understand the role that private forest lands play in terms of water conservation in St. Lucia as a whole. Because the forest reserve as it stands now is not sufficient to be able to continue providing a regular and reliable supply of water. And this is why when I was in forestry, we were looking at what we call a private land acquisition strategy, where the Department of Forestry was identifying critical private lands in the various watersheds that we felt were critical for water supply, all in an effort to expand the forest reserve. So we must understand, while, yes, it's a very small country, that our water supply is very important as well, but we can find ourselves in a very bad situation if we do not also take into consideration the important role that private forest lands play in the development of the water supply and forest conservation, biodiversity conservation, soil conservation, etc.
And what you're raising has certainly been always, for a very, very long time, this struggle, this balance, which quite often was not very well achieved, between the pursuits of development, including agriculture and conservation. And of course, especially along that East Coast, as you know, we know the situations of places like Maho, for instance, right up in the heartland, but that ironically was where the birth of the banana industry actually occurred. Exactly. And so how do you strike that balance between telling farmers, well, you can't really plant anything you want everywhere, so it must be a very difficult challenge when you have to deal with these economic forces.
It is, and while that's a very good point you raised, because in all of what I said, there must be a balance between conservation and development. While we focus on conserving our forest resources for water supply, etc., there must be livelihoods. People have to survive. But in the days when banana was booming, because of the high price that farmers were getting from it, they had very little interest in really conserving forests because their goal was how many bunches of bananas I can harvest on a weekly basis or fortnightly basis. And some of those agricultural areas where they were growing bananas required the farmers to remove all of the vegetation because the banana crop is what we call a light demander. So in doing that, there was very little control in how they cultivate that crop on, for example, steep slopes and along riverbanks and natural waterways. And so that is what resulted in all the high levels of erosion and siltation that we are seeing now in our rivers. So there must be a balance, but at the end of the day, livelihood support is important. People have to survive. But now that the banana industry is not what it is, we are seeing a lot of those degraded lands getting back into a state of vegetation,
right,
which means that the level of erosion is getting less and less over time.
Are we seeing, and I'm sure you'd be one of those to promote it, the shift towards more tree crops? I know, for instance, cocoa has been touted as perhaps one of those tree crops that we should be putting a lot more focus on. Is that occurring in the Erard Valley, in parts of Lakai, where within your constituency?
Yes, we are seeing that not just in my constituency, but all over the island. We are beginning to see a very high demand from private landowners and farmers with regards to the purchasing of tree crops. Because of the fact that they've gone out of the banana industry, a lot of those lands are there, and now they are in the value of getting cocoa and tree crops to go back in terms of rehabilitating those lands. So at least they can generate some economic benefits from it. Because the cocoa and the other tree crops, if well taken care of, those persons can benefit after a minimum of 3 or 4 years where they can begin harvesting the fruits. And the forestry department has a number of projects. I'm sure you've heard of the Ianola project that is situated, that is
the Northeast Coast.
In the Northeast Coast.
Right.
We have another project along the Southeast Coast that just commenced sometime late last year. And we had a major project called the IW Eco Project in the Fonsejac area, all aimed at assisting farmers with tree crops and other forestry species to rehabilitate the lands along riverbanks, on steep slopes, etc., all in an effort to avoid the level of degradation that has taken place over time. So I can tell you, yes, we are seeing a high demand for tree crops, a high demand for cocoa and other species, all in an effort to rehabilitate those lands that were degraded during the banana industry.
And of course, as you mentioned, the Ianola project is, of course, targeted along that northeast coast. No doubt a fair part of that is actually in the Dennery South constituency as well, the whole Dennery, Limier and Dennery Nob, Asponvert and Louvet. A lot of those areas, a lot of potential there for ecotourism, no doubt.
Yes, very much for ecotourism, because this is where we have our tri-forest species like the St. Lucia iguana and a lot of other rare species that exist along these coastal areas. And although there was talk of a development for a highway, the Ianola project really seeks to enhance those areas to be able to ensure that we improve the habitat and manage the habitat in a manner to be able to actually protect those rare and endangered species. Also, a very important tree, which is the Latanier palm, exists in that area as well. I know the value of Latanier palms in terms of broom making and so on. So it is all about livelihoods and livelihood support. So the project really aimed to address those issues and to set aside areas that are critical for the protection of our rare and endangered species. So yes, the question is, it encompasses both the Dennery North and Dennery South constituency, as well as the constituency of Babono and part of Grozili as well.
Right, right. Of course, Dennery South, again, has been no stranger in terms of that ecotourism thrust. I believe there's a very, very popular zip line that actually exists in the Erard area. We're seeing a lot of people who will be heading up that side to go to the Erard waterfall.
Yes.
Is that something that you think can bring greater economic benefit in the long run in terms of your constituency that you want to represent?
Oh, yes, I think so. And it is a reality because the zip line in Erard has generated employment for quite a number of persons within the Dennery constituency. And this others well for the young people because we have persons from the constituency who are involved in tour guiding services and other services of that nature. I would really like to see a lot more of these type activities going on in Dennery, and especially in the Dennery South constituency. And it would have been really nice to tie all of this with the Dennery North constituency, where we have the areas in La Saucière and the trails in Vale. Then if you think of the Fonder Park, the historical nature park at Fonder, I see Dennery as Dennery North and Dennery South having the potential to create a very, very good, high-standard ecotourism product for that region.
Indeed. Now, of course, although it's such a large constituency geographically, the Dennery South, as a constituency in terms of population, is fairly small. I think it's actually the smallest on the island at the moment.
Yes, smallest.
But of course, even with that, though, even with that situation, you then have to develop, I'm sure, a very one-on-one level of familiarity with everybody in the constituency. How is that going?
Oh, that is going well because I was born and raised in Dennery South. I have lived there all my life. I have been involved in the development of the community in terms of sports, religion, community development, and a number of other areas, further jazz, etc. And it is really a small constituency, as you mentioned, and people know each other. It is not in a case like Grozilette where you have to be thinking of Monchi and these other areas, or Chozel, where you have to think of all these different.
Very spread out, yeah.
Yes, it's a very small community, and everybody knows me because I have been involved, as I said, from a little boy, and doing things towards the development of the constituency.
Indeed. What is the situation right about now with respect to Dennery South and COVID-19? I mean, of course, we've got some idea early on that there may have been a few cases here and there. It still remains one of the districts that doesn't really have as many cases as the north, as Grozili, as Castries, as Babonneau. But how have people been coping regardless of that in terms of following the protocols, in terms of also just surviving as well?
Yes, that's a very, very important question. And I must say the people in Dennery South have been going through the pressures just like, the rest of St. Lucia. I know there were a few cases recently, and at one time people in Dennery South were panicking because they were thinking that it was spreading faster than expected. But we were able to get, the numbers went down recently, and so I'm not hearing too many persons in Dennery actually, having the disease at this time. Mm-hmm. But the other concern I have is the fact that out of all of that, you still see a number of persons walking without the mask. They're not social distancing. So it's as if the problem seems to have not gotten into everybody in terms of really taking it seriously. I know the COVID has made not just persons outside of Dennery in a difficult position, but even in Dennery South too, a number of persons who are employed, are also suffering. And you get the calls all the time when you go out to the constituency. People call you and would say to you that as a result of the COVID situation, they have been unemployed and they are looking for, some type of assistance, in terms of helping their cause. Because at the end of the day, it's what you call kitchen economics, It's really about people, getting up in the morning and not having the money, the resources that are required to feed their family. Mm-hmm. So it's really taking a toll in Dennery South as well. People are getting worried. they are worried about the death toll in terms of the 44 that we have had so far. The numbers are increasing, and it's not just affecting the fishermen, but it's affecting the small business people, the persons who have the bar. When I go around the constituency, I speak to those persons who have their bar. They would say that they've not been able to make much because of the fact that they had to close their bar because of the alcohol sales that were not allowed. Mm-hmm. So it's really affecting them in one way or the other. The single mothers who have to be taking care of the kids, the fishermen. It is really, really taking a toll on them.
And I wanted to find out a little bit about the fishermen, actually, because we remember very early on they were being targeted as perhaps even being the ones to be importing the virus through the back door. And then we even saw the closure of the fishing sector for almost, it was supposed to have been, I think, a week. But had it not been for the efforts of fishers themselves to protest, they managed to get that out. But what was the reaction like for a lot of fishers in Dennery?
Oh, I must say at that time that the reaction was really, really bad because there were some fishermen who had the net set out at sea and they couldn't actually go and check on them because of the instant notification of the closure. And I want to take the time to wish all the Dennery fishermen very well because I know what they went through during that 1 week period. They were really annoyed because there was no consultation with them before that decision was taken. And having been going through the problem of lack of storage facility and not being able to sell the fish and all of these marketing issues that they have in terms of the fish sales, it really took a toll on them. I remember having a discussion with some of the fishermen on the fishing port in Dennery, and it had really, really placed them in an unhappy position because they would, for a week, imagine not going to sea for a week, the amount of money that they may stand to lose.
Right.
And most people think that fishermen makes a lot of money. There are times where, for example, around this time of year, the high season, the deep sea fishing season, they would be making some money. But when I really looked at did the figures in terms of what a fisherman, spends on a day-to-day basis and what he earns sometimes.
Right.
Sometimes a fisherman earns less than $2 an hour.
And in fact, and no doubt they're spending quite a bit on fuel because of.
And they spend quite a bit on fuel as well. So. Mm-hmm. They were really, really going through a tough time, and I was really happy that the government came to their assistance by providing each fisherman $500. At least that was able to take care of them during that time. Mm-hmm. But really and truly, it's a matter that is of concern to them because even now, if a fisherman gets to the port at 6, he probably has to think of storing his fish in a cooler for the next day because of the fact that he won't be able to go out there to sell it because of the
curfew.
The curfew,
right?
Yeah. So they're going through a tough time as well, just like the bar owners, the single mothers, and the other persons who are.
And then, of course, just like with Gros Delay, with the Friday night, Dennery with its Saturday night fish fiesta,
yes,
that really hasn't been happening.
Yes, that has not been happening. Although it was happening recently, but this whole fishing activity on a Saturday night is another subject area because. It really needs some attention by, the government because we started with 21 booths in 1999, mm-hmm. and it has actually gone down to 2.
Wow.
Simply because I do not know why enough attention is not, been given because of the fact that it's the only the main activity we have on a weekend. Right. And it was really an opportunity to really help develop the constituency in terms of the spin-off effect coming from the activity. The fishermen benefiting from sale of the fish, the persons producing the ice, the small supermarkets. Mm-hmm. But really, I don't know why it has been left to reach that state. And I'm guaranteeing you, Alex, that when I win this seat and I get to become the new MP for Dennery South, this will be my number one priority to get it back to where it's supposed to be.
Thanks so very much, Mr. Alfred Prospere. We're speaking with the St. Lucia Labour Party candidate for Dennery South, but we're due for a break for our weather at this time. And welcome back to the Lunchroom on Radio Caribbean International. And we are speaking with the St. Lucia Labour Party candidate for the constituency of Dennery South. Now, from a historical perspective, originally Dennery South was part of the Eastern District of St. Lucia when we first had elections. In fact, so the Dennery North, Dennery South, Micoud North, and Micoud South were all one constituency once upon a time, represented by the Labour Party's James Luke Charles. And then later on, the Sir John Compton was able to eke him out and take over that Eastern District. Eventually, it was split into four. I think it was around, I couldn't be sure, was it 1974 or thereabouts? But it became four different constituencies, and it has been a bit of back and forth in terms of representation for Dennery South. I think it was traditionally very Labour, and then it also, we saw some periods as well of United Workers' Party. We've seen it being held, I think, by the Mr. Damien Greaves, or Dr. Damien Greaves, for some time, but then he lost, I think, somewhere along the route. Well, I think there was a shift, in fact. He made a shift as well. And then it has been held for the past three terms by the United Workers' Party's Mr. Edmund Estefan. What makes you so sure, Mr. Prospere, that you'll be successful in the next election?
I am certainly sure that I will, because I have been a Dennerian, born and raised in Dennery. I have been with the people. I have served in so many different capacities, as I mentioned earlier. And I have the confidence that come the next general elections, people will see me as the ideal person to represent them in Parliament. I must say in the Dennery South has numerous social issues that I do not think has been adequately addressed. And one of those issues, I must say, is the youth unemployment. We have a number of young persons who leave school every year, right, and they haven't been able to get employment simply because they do not have the requisite skills that are required to prepare them for the job market. We have a serious issue with flooding in the Dennery village, and I'm sure you would recall just last year we had frequent flooding in the village of Dennery, and it's simply because the village is below sea level, and I do not think enough attention has been given to addressing that problem. Now that we are hearing the term climate change and its impacts in terms of sea level rise, there is even a more urgent need for us to take this problem very seriously and make every attempt to address it in as quickly as possible. I understand the pain that the single mothers go through every year when they have to get school books for their kids. Most of them are unemployed, and they have to find ways to get assistance. We know what happened with the laptop program and so on. I don't want to delve into that. But it's really about working towards making Dennery South a better place. And my vision is to really bring people together, to really help and come together to work to make the constituency what it ought to be. I see Dennery South, because of its location, can be a magnet for economic growth. You know,
in fact, you are perfectly placed exactly halfway between Castries and Grosley, and Vieux Fort, 30 minutes each way.
Yes, yeah. And we know we know very often that we see those buses stopping at the top of Mandalay, taking photos and so on. So that tells you the value of the constituency. But more than that, I think we need to look at the other issues in terms of the housing situation in Dennery. A lot of persons are suffering because of, one, lack of ownership of lands. A lot of those lands in the Dennery constituency.
Was it parish lands, I think?
Well, it's both parish and government. But in Dennery proper, we have both parish and crown lands. But in areas like Lakai and Lime, we also have lots of persons occupying government lands, and they do not have title for those lands. So just imagine you have persons with this big wall structure or whatever dwelling structure they have,
right.
but they don't even have the capacity to be able to apply for water connection simply because they do not own the land. So there is a dire need for government to come in and work with those persons to be able to ensure that they get ownership of those parcels. We are seeing we've seen limited space in terms of housing opportunities for the young people. Dennery, as you know, as I said, it's when compared to Grosley, is very small. But you have a population that is increasing, but areas for housing is becoming an issue. So
and is that because of a lack of infrastructure? Because I mean, there's so much. To me, there's so much land that's available between Lacaille and Bois-Joli, and that could potentially be developed.
Yes, that is true, and if you know, but that is very important. But as well, some of it is privately owned. So, for example, if you drive down to Dennery Village, going up towards the Mandela area, most of the land on the right side of the village is privately owned. But you're right, in the Bois-Joli and Montvin and the Lacaille areas, there are still lots of lands that can be made available for extension in terms of housing development. But that is important because the young people, for example, those who are currently employed, I'm sure, would be thinking of owning a piece of land and getting their house and so on, because they are beginning to see their family moving away from the parents' house and so on. And so there is need for us to give attention to those young persons in terms of making lands available for them. But I'm also concerned about the deteriorating structures in terms of dwelling houses. There are a number of persons who are really unable to do any housing repairs, and this is one of the concerns that I have. And I think there is need for a program to assist persons, especially the elderly, the vulnerable, with improving the housing and the dwelling places and so on. And I must say that I began a program where I've been seeking sponsorship from persons, and we have been able to provide assistance in terms of house repairs to a number of persons in the constituency. So this is one of the high priorities for me, as well as the other social issues that really exist in the constituency.
And I think of so many of the projects that have been done in the Dennery area over the past couple of years. The Dennery Police Station, the Dennery Fire Station, the expansion of the school, the Clendon Mason Secondary School, a new infant school, new preschool. A lot of it, even works even before that, like the Erard Road. The fact that you could even have that tourist product up there as a result of the redevelopment of the Erard Road. A lot of work has been done, but still not enough.
Not enough because, as you mentioned, the Erard Road is important. But one of the concerns I have as well is the agricultural sector, the persons really involved in farming in the Dennery constituency. A lot of those persons are challenged because, for example, in the area of Basil, an area they call Basil, there are a number of persons who are working there, cultivating the land, but that road has gotten into a very...
Now, from my recollection, that those roads were supposed to have been done through a Kuwaiti-funded agricultural feeder road project, which I think had stopped under this administration. I'm not too sure what has come of it. But the other thing I want to touch on, though, very quickly, is the issue of tourism. We mentioned it earlier on, but very early we saw a lot of efforts to get involved in village tourism in Dennery. And, of course, you mentioned the Dennery Fish Fiesta, the investments that were made in the Mandalay and La Puette areas as well. A lot of efforts were put in terms of, as you said, there was even a whole project looking at Fort Door and the whole area there. But yet still, we're not really hearing very much about Dennery right about now in terms of village tourism. We're hearing about village tourism, but we're not hearing anything about Dennery.
Dennery, and that's very true, and it is very important that we consider village tourism in areas like Dennery, as I said, because of its location between the two airports, as well as all of the other infrastructure that exists. We have the waterfalls, we have the rivers, we have Fort Park, we have a number of areas. If you can think of the areas in the Probably area where we have our white-breasted thrasher, one of our rare and endangered species.
Right.
So we have the resources available, but it's just a matter of harnessing all those resources to really improve the whole ecotourism, the whole village tourism in Dennery. I remember being part of the Founder Foundation where we were having jazz every year. And apart from the jazz, this area is a historical site which used to attract a number of tourists on a regular basis. But again, with the COVID, that has the numbers in terms of visitation has dropped tremendously. But really and truly, I think it is very important that any government or MP really need to take a very serious look at the potential of Dennery South, and I mean Laka and Lime as well,
right,
and really come together, even with the Dennery North constituency, and really come together to really enhance the whole village tourism.
I wanted to touch on that as well in terms of even agriculture. The Ranju farms, the lands, I think we had heard so much about it, government owned, I believe, and then the government said that they were going to be assisting farmers to get in there. And I don't know if there's been a change of policy, but I'm now hearing about a racetrack.
Yes, I have heard talk of a racetrack. I'm not sure exactly what part of the constituency is going to be, but I'm hearing talk of a racetrack. But I am not too sure exactly. But you're right, because all these Ranju lands have been sitting there, although part of it is very prone to flooding. But I see no reason why these lands cannot be developed and, assist, upgrade it to a level where we can give it to the young people and, encourage more young persons to get into various forms of agriculture in those areas.
Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, we're still thinking of Dennery as a village. Do you see that changing soon? Do you see that Dennery perhaps should be considered a town very soon? And how do you encourage that to happen? How do you actually see more activity, commercial activity even, to Dennery?
My long-term vision for Dennery is to convert it from a village to a town. And it's basically about bringing all the amenities together, bringing all the people together. And one of the things I want to note is that there was a program when Damian Graves was doing the seawall, and the idea was because of the high risk associated with the sea and persons who were living along the beachfront.
Right.
Provisions were made for those persons to move to the upper areas. That's in a place called Green Mountain, Rocky Lane.
Right. And
the whole idea was to really develop that beachfront and to help convert the village into a town. Mm-hmm. Just imagine, colleagues, in the Dennery, between the closest ATM from Dennery is Viewfort or Castries.
Right.
Sorry, cul-de-sac.
Right.
I see potential where we can bring in all those landowners together and get the stakeholders involved, get people to come and invest in Dennery. So the persons from the Valley, Mabia Valley and Pralin don't have to go all the way to Viewfort to get service, like an ATM or a bank or something, shopping centers, etc. So whilst I understand Dennery is prone to flooding, and that may be a difficult thing to implement in the short term or mid-term, but I see as a long-term vision, Dennery being converting from a village to a town.
And in fact, as you mentioned flooding, I think there's some work going on right about now, which was originally programmed under the Disaster Vulnerability Risk Reduction Project. Now, yes. I suspect that work should have occurred a long time ago, but it's finally occurring now. How is that panning out? Is there what's the plan there as you know it?
Yes, I can tell you that the works work is ongoing now in terms of the drainage, but I think it was really caused or implemented as a result of the playing field that is being upgraded in Denver, because what happened is that they are putting this turf on the playing field, and as a result, the level that the playing field is now is, I think, almost 3 feet from what the original location was. And from what my understanding is that if the drainage works and drainage is not upgraded in around the playing field, then it may make the flooding problem worse. But just to give you a little insight on what I think the problem is in terms of the flooding problem, we have seen an urban sprawl in the western part of the village. That's Rock Hill and Green Mountain.
Right.
And there is because of the exposure of the soil, when you have high rainfall, the water situation settles around the school area and the playing field.
Right.
And it goes down into the sea very slowly, especially at the time if the tide is very high.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what is important is for us to be able to take a very close look in terms of assessing the rate at which the water gets down into the village.
Now, as you said, it's going to get worse with this asphaltic turf because this is an impermeable surface. So that means that the water is now going to run off even quicker.
Exactly. So we may have to create dams or some means of slowing the water or channeling that water into another area.
I mean, need like a retention pond or something of
retention pond or something, and then afterwards to have the water really slowly back into the channel or the rivers, what you call it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do not see the drainage problem that is ongoing now will solve the problem to the extent that I think Denrians will be satisfied or happy with. But I think we need to take a much deeper look in terms of how we can channel the water outside of the village and channel it back to the sea afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a very, very challenging situation in Denver South. It has been a problem for decades, and every year when you have to be, washing the floors and cleaning the kitchen and stuff because of water levels and so on going into their homes. It's really something that needs urgent attention, and it is something that really needs to be addressed.
Right, and of course, and you're stuck between two rivers too. You have the Tualo and then the main Den River.
And the Mole River, yes.
Mm-hmm. Now, just before because we don't have very much time, the Dennery Polyclinic, I mean, that was supposed to be replacing the very old Dennery Hospital, which had in fact been upgraded recently. But what's going on there? Is there any movement with that Dennery Polyclinic? It was supposed to be a very substantial project, I think nearly $20 million, and it hasn't moved for the past 4 years.
Yes, actually there was some work done sometime early last year, but it came to a stop, and since that time there has been nothing happening. I really wish that this project would come on stream because it would really facilitate people from Dennery North as well as Dennery South, and more importantly, where our current hospital is located or health polyclinic is located.
People can't find it. A friend of mine quite recently, just a couple of days ago, said they were trying to find the Dennery Hospital, and they didn't believe that was the road to the hospital because it was narrow. Yeah.
And even when it's flooded in Dennery, it's difficult for persons from the village to access it. So I really cannot tell you what is happening, but I just hope that we can get this hospital to start very soon, and so Dennery North and the people in the environments environments will be able to benefit a lot more from that new polyclinic. But it has come to a stop, and I do not know what is the problem.
So, Mr. Alfred Prospere, we're almost out of time here. In fact, we are out of time. I'm going to give you some opportunity, of course. Of course, you'll be invited again whenever you have the chance. We would certainly like to hear from you and to see how things progress with your campaign. But any parting words for us and for the listeners?
Yes, I want to tell the people of Dennery South, like Lime, that we are in this thing together. I am not here to support red over yellow or yellow over red or independent over yellow. I'm in this thing for every single person in Dennery South. But I know it cannot be done on my own, so I need everybody to work with me to make it happen. I want Dennery to be the envy of other communities, and I really think if we come together in this journey, we will prosper with Prospere. I am thanking you for having me, colleagues, and feel free anytime if you want to call me again. I'll be happy to make my presence and to be making that contribution and to share with you my plans for the consistency of Dennery South.
Thank you so very, very much, Mr. Alfred Starbatch Prospere.